So, welcome everyone. Today, we're going to be, in a very collective manner, discuss what economic justice is and why SDG changemakers, which is all of us, must fight for it. I'm Lemona Chanda. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of the Global Activists Network, which you know as GAN. And I will be navigating through different topics, different elements that are related to economic justice, not to tell you what economic justice is, but to instigate a conversation, a discussion, so that we all identify how it is very interconnected with our everyday living. Now, we will be recording the session and sharing the session at a later stage. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions in the chat box, which I will be checking towards the end. And when I ask a question or when I ask for any input from your end, feel free to suggest, feel free to share your experience. And towards the end, we can have a question and answer session or an open discussion as well. So yeah, let's get started. This is GAN's second masterclass, and it is on economic justice. So moving on, what is economic justice? It is building a fairer future for all. Now, that's a very broad thing to say. It is about our fair future, about our just future, and how do we do it? By transforming systems of inequality through gender justice, decolonization, and inclusive economies. Now, that's a very heavy sentence right there. And we're going to be discussing many different things to understand what these things actually mean in our day-to-day life. Now, if I wanted to ask you what you think economic justice is, what would you say? I know there's a definition on the screen, but if you just ignored that for a moment, can anyone share what you think economic justice is, or what does it sound like to you?
Equal opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll read out the definition. Economic justice in simple terms means creating an economy, and I even say creating an ecosystem where wealth, opportunities, and resources are distributed fairly. Everyone can access dignified work, education, healthcare, and financial services. Systems no longer exploit people based on gender, race, class, caste, disability, or geography. It sounds like, from the definition, that most countries have laws that ensure that this is the system, or this is in place. But when we really look into many laws that exist, or many practices, many norms, you will realize that that is not the case. Now, it might happen that just because I have more experience from certain countries, I might be referring to those countries, but I encourage you to think about your community, the country you're from, or a country or a region from where you have a lot of experiences. And you will start realizing that there are many things that stand out as unjust. And that's sort of what we're trying to identify and change. But if I were to tell you one single thing to remember, that would be reducing inequalities. Now, when we talk about social justice, we say the same thing. When we talk about any sort of injustice, it comes down to reducing inequalities. But the truth is, how we work, how we get paid, how we get our annual leave, where we are from a socioeconomic perspective in our society, everything is interconnected with how these inequalities play a role and how we miss out on achieving economic justice. And that's what we want everybody to start thinking, because you might be an expert on climate change, someone else might be an expert on gender equality, someone might be an expert on health, but it comes down to identifying where the inequalities are so that we can all come together and promote holistically what economic justice is. Now, why the current economic system is unjust? What is the problem? Can anyone share their thoughts on that? I'm going to sometimes look at some notes that I have, so I'm not distracted. I'm just making sure that I'm not missing anything from sharing. But feel free to share what you think the problem is with the current system. While you keep thinking about it, I have said the current global economic system, so it sounds like a very heavy thing. But if you just think what's wrong with the economics of any country or globally, I'm going to go to the next slide to tell you some of the major things that have an impact. Colonial legacies, patriarchy, racism, imperialism, concentrated wealth and power. Who controls the system? Some countries, and it comes down to mostly developed countries holding disproportionate economic influence, and there is more wealth or there is more economic power in certain countries. For instance, the G7, I don't know if you have ever heard of the G7. G7 are the most powerful 7 economies. And an example would be that G7 countries, the United Kingdom is one of the countries within the G7. G7 countries make up less than 4% of the International Monetary Fund membership. Yet, G7 countries control approximately 43% of IMF's voting power, which means it's almost 50% of voting power. So these countries get to decide, IMF policies, whereas IMF works globally with the countries when it comes to economic sustenance. Now, when I say colonial legacies, what do I mean? Or colonial legacies, patriarchy, racism, what do these things mean? And is it really wrong to have concentrated wealth and power? When we talk about colonial legacies, the issue is that there are certain practices that make certain economies or that place certain economies in a favorable position. And that has, over the years, encouraged a system of negotiation or a system overall that works favorable towards one country. Being wealthy as a country or a nation in itself is not wrong. But if that is put into a system where you're exerting unfair influences that make, that can end up with an outcome that puts other countries in an unfavorable or unjust position, or even something as simple yet significant as losing bargaining power, then that kind of concentrated wealth and power is not something that we should encourage. And when we have these sort of practices, these are the prevalent practices, then the outcome will be that more emphasis is put on profit or revenue than people, the common masses. And when we're looking about, when we're talking about, the common people owing debt, it will be more about making them pay what they owe than how their welfare is being treated, how their social protection is. Now, when I refer to social protection, I take a very broad definition of it. So that should include your access to health, access to education, pension, quality of life, everything in total. And when you look at social protection policies, even for one of the G7 countries like the United Kingdom, you will see major pockets of population still suffering and not having enough. For instance, homelessness is a massive issue in the UK. It's one of the most developed and most powerful economies in the world, yet people live in poverty. And this is extreme poverty. Many pensioners who have paid taxes all their lives don't have enough, and they're able to eat, and they barely are able to meet their ends meet based on the pension they receive. They're not able to eat well, let alone, leave alone luxury or any sort of comfort. They are choosing between, should I pay my energy bills or should I eat? That's the kind of situation many people are in. And these are just two examples that I'm using. There are many more examples out there. So when the situation is like that, then we have to agree that there isn't enough social protection. So now I have used some examples, but I will ask you, who do you think suffers the most when there are unfair practices in place?
Definitely the masses.
Yes, but if you were to think about more specific groups, who would you say?
Say marginalized groups and communities.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll give you some ideas as well. Research has shown that when systems are unfair, some of the worst groups that are impacted are women and girls. So we can spend our lives trying to promote gender equality. We're not going to attain it if we don't reach economic justice, which means even something as simple as parental leave, that is an issue in the UK. That policy has to be fair. Something as simple as, do you have social protection? Are you able to bear children and still feel protected and not hit poverty? All these things are critical factors. Some other groups I'll tell you, indigenous communities. We don't talk about indigenous communities a lot in the UK, but if we refer to Africa in general, if we refer to Canada, if we refer to Australia, the US, South Asia, Southeast Asia, there are many indigenous communities. Now they are almost invisible from these sort of conversation or discussion. People who are working in low and middle income countries, which we popularly call the global south. Why? Because first, there are unfair policies. There is no social protection. Secondly, a lot of the countries that are low and middle income have informal economies. So they are not formally recorded. And it's like many people work, they can be daily laborers. They go out, they do something, get paid on a daily basis. And that's how they sustain. So they don't know how they're going to run their lives the next day, whether they will eat or not. And, thinking about pension or thinking about old age is a concept that doesn't exist in their world just because they're so poor and there's so much uncertainty. Also migrant workers, a lot of the times they don't have the rights, they don't have the recognition, or sometimes they don't have proper residency statuses. So they miss out on being part of the census, of the official record. So these are some of the groups that get heavily influenced. But if I were to pick one I would definitely identify women and girls. So now moving on to this conversation, the gendered reality of economic inequality. Like I have said, women carry the hidden economy. Why? If you think about your grandmothers, if you think about your mothers, aunts, any women that you have seen, you will see most of the times, even today, that women drive most of the work that's not paid. The unpaid liability, the unpaid work liability always falls on the women. So that creates a huge imbalance. And many economies in many different ways, even for developed countries, depend on women's labor. And this work is not visible, it's not discussed, it's not considered a part of the policy, and most importantly, it's not paid. And you know what happens when it's not paid? It's not respected, it's not valued. So that's the burden that most women carry in most of the countries in the world. And what are some of the other things that women face? They face lower wages. Even in the UK, there is a pay gap that exists between men and women. They face limited career advancement. One of the major reasons is because women bear children. You take time off work, you spend time raising your children, and some are able to go back to work, some are not. And when you have done that, you lose your protection, social protection. You lose a lot of the benefits that you used to have. And people who are able to go back to their career, they have lost years. So their peers have advanced way ahead and they're still catching up. So there's a mental pressure there as well. Then these women, a lot of them become financially dependent if women stay at home and there is no state protection, there is no social protection to take care of them and their children. Then they're depending on their families, mostly their partners. And a lot of the times, this financial dependence causes women to be vulnerable. We see that domestic abuse is rampant in most countries. So even when someone's not going through abuse, that this very simple fact that women become financially dependent is an issue, because then her autonomy to decide what she wants to do decreases. And then very high poverty rates among the elderly population as well. One of the key facts that I wanted to highlight is when any government cut public services, it's women who fill the gap. Either way, with very low paid labor or with unpaid labor. I have mentioned some of the things that women do, but I'm just going to, because I have them in minutes, I'm just going to tell you mention them. Examples of unpaid care work, like childcare, elderly care, cooking, cleaning, emotional labor. All these things are carried, the burden of these things are carried by women in our society. Now, the poly crisis, why economic justice matters now the most. Can any of you say what the poly crisis is?
I don't think I know of it.
But can you guess?
Poly crisis. I'm not. I can guess, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Sure. So I will decode that. So poly is multiple and crisis is crisis. We are we exist in a world right now where we're going through multiple global crises. For instance, we are going through a climate crisis. It's not even a crisis, it's a catastrophe that we are going through. We had the COVID-19 crisis. Officially, the global crisis has come to an end, but the impact of COVID-19 is still ongoing. The adverse impact of COVID-19 is still ongoing. People have lost jobs. People entered into poverty. People who had very little savings have used it up, incurred debt and all that. So, it's still impacting people. We still haven't recovered from it. And some experts are already saying that there might be another health crisis like that. It might be COVID, but it might be something different than COVID, but we are on the verge of facing another crisis. There is debt. COVID-19 is a massive contributor to the debt crisis, but there are many other reasons. There's, massive inflation. Cost of living has gone up in every country. Every community has been impacted by cost of living. So there is a massive debt crisis. People are not able to make payments toward their debts. Even nations have incurred massive debts. That contributes to the polycrisis. It's part of the polycrisis problem. There's massive inflation, like I mentioned, at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, and at a state level. There's inflation. All the actors are trying to balance, but we're finding it extremely difficult. And a fine example is if you look at how many head of states we have had in the past few years. It's record breaking. I think we have had 7 changes, if I can remember it correctly. And our current Prime Minister in the UK, he said that we want to be a government, I forgot the exact words he used, but the cost of living government or something on that line. Because cost of living is such a massive issue, even people who have good jobs, they're struggling to pay energy bills. That's pushing their families into poverty. Conflict and displacement. Conflict is pushing countries to incur a lot of debt, and conflict is causing people to be displaced. If there's war going on in one country, the people of that country rushes to the neighboring countries for shelter, for safety. And one thing is for the government to think about how are we going to fund this war, and how are we going to support every other expenses that we have as a country, as a nation. The other aspect is if we have an influx of population coming into our country, how are we going to feed them? How are we going to take care of them? And a lot of the times it becomes really challenging to give them a decent quality of life, just because all the countries are struggling to begin with. Not because people don't want to help, but because people don't have enough. And this is part of the polycrisis. Then food insecurity. There is food insecurity in every single country. You will find people, you will come across news where, you will see that some people, a very small percentage of people have massive wealth, but that is not the majority. The majority of people in all the countries suffer from food insecurity. If you look at food banks in the UK, and I keep mentioning UK because I'm based here, if you visit any country, you will see that people struggle to get food, and that is probably the most basic thing to have. And so food insecurity is part of the polycrisis. And may I just add that food insecurity is not only about feeding oneself or their family or their community or their country. It's also related to how food is produced. So we have climate crisis, which I mentioned. If there is rampant natural disasters, farmers lose crops. There is degrading fertility on land because we have more demand of food, but we don't have the space or the means to grow, to produce food. So that is also, a massive contributor of food insecurity. When we talk about low and middle income countries and some countries in Europe, for instance, I can instantly think of Italy, is a country where farming is a significant thing, or a way to earn one's living. And when you look at the quality of life of farmers, it's not at a level where you can say that these people have the basics. They're always struggling. So there's a technical aspect that, are we growing enough food? Do we have enough means to grow food? And then there's also, as an individual, do I have enough to eat? All these are part of the polycrisis. And there's some things that I wanted to highlight as well, and why the polycrisis and all that matters, because these sort of challenges deepen and expand any existing inequalities, no matter how many policies we make. If we continue to have these sort of challenges, it's going to keep expanding the inequalities that we're trying to get rid of. I've already mentioned that women and girls face the highest level of adverse impact. There's increased unpaid care burdens. Most of the times it's on women, but I'm talking about people in all their diversity. When you look at the care industry, specifically in the UK, you will see that there are certain communities that tend to cater to the care jobs. But when you look at the quality of care jobs that exist out there, it's not well paid. A lot of the times people are burnt out because they're doing such long hours. In short, it's not a great industry to be part of. You're giving so much out of your life, but what you get back in return is not much. Loss of jobs and income. A lot of it happened due to COVID, but there are other reasons. Economies are not doing great. If you look at the UK economy, there are no jobs. I have had many people reach out to me asking me if I could help them get a job. Because people have the degrees, people have the experience, but there are no jobs. Reduced access to education and healthcare. I think healthcare systems generally, globally, are struggling because there are more patients, and there are many reasons to it. I'm not going to get into the details because that's going to take the tangent of our conversation on a different line. But it's true that healthcare systems suffer. And it's true that education, good quality education, has become a very wanted commodity because it comes at an expense. So, in short, without economic justice, the sustainable development goals of the Agenda 2030 cannot be achieved. That's not happening. One of the most essential things that we should start doing is recognizing and valuing care work. Care work is an ecosystem, it's an essential infrastructure. It sustains families, communities, economies, states, regions. And what can we ask the government to change? We absolutely need more investment in public care systems. We absolutely need to expand healthcare benefits and childcare benefits. We need to enhance social protection and how we look at social protection. We need to ensure that there's equal pay for work of equal value. We need to identify, people who are spending a lot of their time and effort in unpaid care work, and address that as a challenge. And we need to do something so that they get remunerated for the effort that they're putting in. I've mentioned public care systems. I've mentioned healthcare, childcare, social protection, because in its entirety, when you look at these things, and if you think about where you come from, you might not be from the UK, you might come from a different country, you might come from a different region, and things might look differently in where you're based. You will realize that if, I hope it doesn't happen, but if we were to lose everything overnight, do you exist in a country or a system where you will get protection from the state so that you can start your life from the beginning and still end up with a quality life? For most countries, the answer will be no. If you look at, now I'll talk about some positive examples. Some Scandinavian countries, like Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. There are several Scandinavian countries who have adopted a welfare approach. They invest in the population. They invest in their citizenship. How do they do it? They have ensured that if you are a citizen of that country, you don't have to pay for education up to, I guess, university level, which is post-secondary level, which is a massive help, because if we compare that to the UK, most students graduate with a massive debt. If you have a child in those countries, you are given enough benefits and help so that you are not pushed into poverty. You can take care of yourself, you feel rested, you can take care of your child. Their policies, their systems are made in that way. So we have good references that we can look at when we are thinking about our policies and our systems. Now, I'm based in the UK. You might be based somewhere else. But if we all go back to our communities, our politicians, our leaders, and if we all influence policies from where we are based, overall, it's going to promote economic justice, because all these things are part of this great umbrella of economic justice. Now, if I was to ask you what your key recommendation would be, or what change would you like to see in this world, what would you say? If you can think of anything, and you might come across a personal experience or something that you have noticed in your community, it will be great if you share what would be your recommendation. Anyone?
I think you've said a lot. We've covered a lot, but what I'll add is that I think there needs to be a change in the way leaders are chosen in countries. I think a lot of citizens are not really much informed about, let me just even make it like very, personal. Where I come from, I'm from Ghana originally, and in Ghana, we run a 4-year kind of party system. So every 4 years, a new party comes to power. And I remember from a young, age, like I would see politicians on TV saying, when I come, I'll do this, I'll change the healthcare system, everyone will go to school for free, big promises in 4 years. And that's crazy. And then once they come to power, I mean, we all know how, I don't want to categorize all politicians as the same, but we all know how most of them are. They are very good liars, convincing liars. So they deceive people, give people all these hopes and promises, And then, people are also desperate. And, if someone is desperate, if you give them, like, if they deserve £100 and if you give them £1, like, they will thank you, they'll worship you basically. And we are talking about a developing or underdeveloped country like Ghana. So you have these leaders, they prey on people's desperation and ignorance, because most people only hear, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that. They don't even ask questions, like thought-provoking questions. It's okay. So how are you going to do this? What strategies have you put in place? How feasible are these? Like, ask the questions that need to be asked. They don't ask it. And once they come to power, like, there's no accountability, and then there's no accountability mechanisms in place, so that, okay, this is what you said you were going to do. Where are we now? What are the challenges? Where do we go from here? If it's not working, can we change the strategy? Those kind of things are not in place. So it's like there's always this disconnect between the leaders and the people, because you have, and again, another thing is, I think this is something that has come up a lot in conversations, is like there needs to be like a national development plan in place in most countries, especially developing countries, because 4 years is not enough to say in 4 years time I would what do they even say, some of the promises, I'll fix all the roads, I'll fix all the street lights, all children will be in school, I'll cut down the cost of living in 4 years. Be real, like, you can't, that's a big goal, and it would take probably more than 4 years to achieve that. But when people hear that, because they are misinformed, uneducated, they don't ask questions, or maybe based on whatever traditions or cultural values that they hold, like, and these things go on, and then you see that we keep on changing government, leaders actually, but the system is still the same, because we are not addressing the big questions. You're not addressing the actual need. And so people keep on living in a vicious cycle of poverty, because these leaders come, do whatever they want. They go after the 4 years, or another person comes and they come with their own manifestos, big plans. And it's like, we keep on changing leaders every 4 years. Different parties keep on coming to power, but we are still living in poverty. But, the cost of living, standard of living is poor, and, we are not progressing. So these are really, like, big conversations, but that's why I think basically I'll just stop here.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing your thoughts so honestly. I mean, definitely there has been a loss of public confidence in many democratic countries, and the actual reason is there is no accountability. Even when leaders are elected through democratic elections, they are not keeping their promises, like you said. Also, one of the things that I see happening is that young people are very energetic. Young people have great ideas, but they're not getting the spaces in politics. So it's almost their presence is treated as a token. We need a young person at the table, so they will be invited there, but are they treated as a decision maker? Rarely that happens. That's also something that I have noticed. So in terms of policies, I have listed some here, but the list is endless. This is just some example, like parental leave. And this is from a UK perspective for all genders. Is a policy that would directly promote economic justice, affordable childcare, affordable education, decent pension for caregivers, reintegration support for women returning to work, protection for migrant and informal care workers as well. Now, this is very care work specific, but if you were to consider these things even generally, like, do people have parental leave generally? No, they don't. They have some form of leave, but it's not a fair system. Or we still need policy reforms when it comes to these sort of things. I have not listed, but people living with disability, they're entirely dependent on care workers and social protection that the state provides. And rarely you will see that they're talked about, they're discussed. So there are a lot of policy reforms. There are a lot of areas that we need. And for major changes, like you said, there has to be good politics. There has to be good politicians as well. financial inclusion and women's economic empowerment. The reason I chose to add this to our conversation is because women constitute half of the world's population. So I thought that this will give us a window in thinking. If we were thinking about every single marginalized groups, these are the things that they would need or they face as a challenge. And we can understand or we can develop that perspective in light of what women face globally. And, you know, women are the ones who are impacted mostly. So I wanted to highlight that, there are many countries where women don't have bank accounts. They don't have proper access to credit and loans. They're not able to have a credit history. So they're out of the credit system. And if you don't have a credit history, you can't have loans. There are laws that are discriminatory. There are many social and familial barriers that women face in becoming financially independent. Some people will even, or some societies will even go on to say, why do women need to be independent? They're in a good enough situation. They are inferior to men. They don't need to be independent. And so it becomes very difficult to reason with them. There are lack of entrepreneurship opportunities, lack of financial education. Lack of financial education is a pandemic. It's a global issue. Because even when you have a university degree, I don't think you necessarily have the level of financial education that you need to have. I know many people who graduated university with massive debts. Like, I am still paying my student loan. If I had known better, I would have managed my finances better. Financial education is something that needs to be instilled in people from a very, very early age. Then we grow up with gender stereotypes. In many countries, that happens, and that's because of the subconscious feeding of information, subconscious prejudiced feeding of information that we receive from many different sources. We need to have gender responsive financial policies. We need to have proper financial systems where women can thrive when they want to get into business. We need to have systems where women get access to STEM education and training, and they're encouraged. We need to have policies or investments that adopts a gender lens. So this is sort of like a bowl of, things that are lacking and things that we need to have. And I just wanted to introduce a little bit of these things to you from a women's rights perspective. Now you take this and you think about your community, you will see there are many groups that are facing the same challenges. If you look at the LGBTQ community, I would say is the same, if not worse. If you look at people suffering from disability, you'll see the same situation. Many elderly populations still have issues, and especially when it comes to technology, because technology is advancing so fast. They're finding it very difficult to, keep track of that. So I just wanted to, introduce these ideas to you, and so that you can start thinking about these things. You can pick one item from the list, from the slide, and see, where do I see injustice? Where do I see discrimination? Where I come from, I don't have the right. I'm not able to inherit anything from my father or from my husband. And I come from a society where girls are not encouraged to become financially independent. girls are not encouraged to pursue, professional degrees. Rather, they're raised as inferior to the male child. They're treated inferior to the male child, and they're encouraged to become wives. Now imagine if you have never received any support from your father, you have not had access to proper education so that you can become independent, and you are relying on a person who doesn't support you, where does that lead you? I also come from a society where women from my community don't have the right to divorce. You literally have to go through a court process to separate. A legal divorce doesn't even exist in my community. And many people engage in polygamy just because they don't have to, they're not accountable. Legally, no one can do anything about it. So who do you blame in this situation? Do you blame the society? Do you blame the parents? Do you blame the partners? I blame the laws. I blame oppressive laws that perpetuate, discriminatory practices. And it's a very easy fix. So that's what pushed me to start thinking about gender equality. That was my journey, and nothing has changed. I talk about it, but I haven't seen people's attitude changing. There are more women speaking out, but in terms of systemic changes, I have not seen much. That was my experience. I'm sure when you look into your lives, you will see many different. It doesn't have to be a women's experience. I'm sure you will find, some form of prejudice, some form of a challenge in your community, in your life, in your family. And changing things from the root level, promoting policies that are very inclusive and diverse and that takes care of society as a whole, is what's going to help us attain economic empowerment. That's going to help us attain economic justice. Because we're referring to economy so many times, requires financial power. And why does it matter? Because financial autonomy will increase decision-making power for anybody, not just women, safety and independence, and community resilience. I think we have talked quite a bit about economic empowerment and how these sort of the systems, our power, decision-making power, all these things contribute. And so I'm going to move on.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
My name is Gertrude, by the way, and I'm one of the co-founders of GAN. So one thing I would like, with all the points that you've raised, like brilliant submission so far, is why it is so important that feminism exists. And I actually, I don't know how active I know you're on Twitter, but I don't know how active you've been in recent years. But when I see certain discourses on feminism, I always laugh. And when I see, sometimes when I see even some women join forces with men to trash feminism, it makes me so sad as a woman and apparently there's a social media or Twitter, or whatever definition of feminism. I didn't know feminism had two different meanings, the dictionary one and then the social media one. But anyway, just to come back to the main point. So I can't help but, think about how my life would have been if I was born into certain cultures or countries. Just like you're saying, like in your country, you're not allowed to inherit your father's property. Some women are not allowed to divorce and all that. And even in the UK here, because I remember in 2018? Probably 2018, yeah. Amnesty International released this suffragette spirit campaign map. And just to kind of also throw in there, I was featured on that map. So that map celebrated human rights activists, women human rights activists all over the UK. And I was shocked to find out that it was also in celebration of 100 years since women in the UK were allowed to vote. This was in 2018, just 8 years ago, and 100 years or 1908 or whatever. So it's just saying like how, so before 1908, like the leaders that were elected, that means that we're just representative of men's voices or men's choices and not women.
Absolutely.
How would these people, or how would these people who were elected even advocate for women's rights if it was only men who were voting for them and not women? And thinking
Well,
about
women didn't even have voting rights. It hasn't been long that, women started having voting rights.
exactly. And the other day, I was listening to this lady speak on this platform. I think it was Global Landscapes Forum conference somewhere, I think 2024.
Yes.
And she was speaking about this lady. I think she's an athlete or something in one of, I don't know if it's Kenya and which other African countries. And I think there was something with her and her ex-husband, or her ex-husband took all her properties. So, something about she not having the right to own the land or something. And
Yes.
it's crazy. And I can't believe that in this 21st century, just like you're saying, like there are actually women who still have to fight to, to own properties, to even rent. I've even heard in certain countries, when if you're a single woman, some landlords will not rent their houses to you because they're like, where's your husband? So I've heard women's stories where they have to, hire boyfriends or let their brothers or their male friends pretend to be their fiancés or husbands to be able to, and all this is just ridiculous. So then my question is that why do people attack feminism? Because it's good, because it's just kind of giving we women the power back to fight, some of these systems, some of these beliefs that have been made against us. Because I can't be, even in the UK, I heard is it in 1975? It's not really too far away, too far off that women were allowed to have bank accounts. I can't remember the year, but it was 19 something. And I was shocked. I'm like, are you serious? So just imagine if, as a developed country or one of the most powerful economies in the world, you have, it's in just recent times that women were allowed to vote, women were allowed to own bank accounts and all. So imagine how it is like for underdeveloped and developing countries. It means we have a long way to go. Like the battle is really just started. And like I said, back to what I said in the beginning, I'm so thankful for feminism, because if feminism didn't exist, I would not have an education. I'll not be able to, have the lifestyle I'm living here, because not when I was about to rent a house or where I live, nobody asked me to go and bring a boyfriend or a husband or show proof of marriage or all those things before I do whatever I want to do. Because I suppose I live in a progressive society, but I can't say the same for some women living in, some countries, which it's really such a shame that even when we talk about, is it Malala, who was shot, or almost like her life almost ended because she just wanted, a chance at education, which is utterly ridiculous. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, there are people like her in her country who are still facing some of these things. And like you're saying, we are having conversations, people are challenging these norms, but it still exists. And that is a problem. And, we need to change, even though they say we are I think about 132 years or so away from achieving gender equality, which is scary. But I always believe that having conversations, whether it's having conversations, whether it's writing to your MP, starting a petition, starting a campaign, whatever it is that you can do in your own right as a woman. You don't even have to be an activist. Like these things, if you're benefiting from education, if you're benefiting from certain rights, and you see that, or that other women in other communities or societies are in, like, it's enough to spark action for you to do something. You don't have to have the tag as an activist or an advocate for something before you speak or use your voice. So yeah, I'll just stop here, but I just wanted to chip in, like, the importance of feminism in, these kind of discussions. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts once again, Gertrude. I'll say one thing. I have noticed when people don't have rational reasons, they attack and try to discredit very valuable ideas. And that's what happens to feminism as well, because you don't have a rational, argument against feminism. True feminists will never say, and I know there are many different kinds of feminism, but it's not very difficult to understand. A feminist will value and uphold the rights of all living beings. True feminists will take care of the planet, will take care of animals, will take care of men, of children, because they want equity for all. It's not let's provide undue advantages to women. That's not what feminists do. Feminists want to promote equity. And I'm going to put that as, one of the items. I've listed 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not able to type, so you will not see me typing here. But that's one of the items. But I just wanted to ask if anyone else had any ideas. You've already talked about corruption and degradation in politics and democracy. You've already talked about how feminism is attacked. So I have two very important items. I wanted to check if anybody else wanted to add anything to our list. I'm just going to suggest some very dry, topics. When we talk about what must we change globally, we must end austerity policies and reform international financial institutions, cancel unjust sovereign debt. Now, these are very heavy things. If you read about any of these items, I'm sure you will find hundreds of articles, hundreds and thousands of discussions on this. Taxation is one of the most unfair, unjust systems out there where, it is imposed on everyone, but how people pay taxes, it's not a fair system. We almost need an entire reform of this system. Due to imperialism, due to colonialism, we have developed a system, or we have developed a cycle where countries have been placed, and some countries, I would say, without their fault, ended up in the disadvantaged section. And as a result, they have incurred sovereign debt. But when you look at the historical aspect of how that happened, you will see that there has been many unfair incidents that have happened and that have sort of led these countries to incur. Now, the stuff that I have listed there, you don't necessarily need to understand any of it, because I think we have discussed enough to understand and identify how economic justice works. But if I were to give you one example, if you look at Africa as a continent, it's the richest continent in the world. Yet, it has people with the most extreme poverty at the same time. Now, how does that work? This is a direct result of unfair systems, toxic colonial legacies, and unfair policies, and absence of bargaining power. All of Africa's wealth and resources are drained, where the countries are not able to negotiate to their advantage. And these are, like I keep saying, that these are very technical, doesn't sound very interesting to many people, but these are essential things that ultimately need to change. I have come across this news article where a cocoa farmer, a child to begin with, collects cocoa and have never tasted chocolate in their life. Look at the level of injustice. Look at the disparity. And no one's affected by it. We don't talk about it. Many people don't even know that this is happening. So that's one thing. Many people don't know that Africa used to be a matriarchy. And given my land exposure, my understanding and interest in land rights, inheritance rights, and all that, I know that there are many countries or communities in Africa where legally women is the landowner, But in practice, they don't have the ownership. It's controlled by men from their family. Just because they're told you are a woman, why do you need to have the control? We are the men, we will control it. Now, I'm not blaming the men, but I'm blaming the system, because we cannot be having these sort of systems. We cannot be, we have to be promoting financial independence, which brings us back to our original discussion, how we started, why this matters. And countries in the global south, low and middle income economies, we need fiscal space. We need funds to invest in healthcare. You will see that there was disparities when it came to distribution of vaccines during the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to have enough funds so that even informal workers in low and middle income economies have social protection. They can think, I've struggled all my life, but I have some pension that I can look forward to. There's fund so that everyone has access to education. People don't have to choose between having a meal and attending schools, because there are many countries where that's the case, where girls are not treated differently to boys. And so, I have said that economic justice means that we should be listening to Global South leadership, not blindly. It has to have a feminist lens. It has to have a diverse lens. Valuing local knowledge. We ignore indigenous knowledge. We ignore indigenous practices. We ignore indigenous systems. It is essential to give power back to people at the grassroots. That's when you see diversity thriving. That's something that we absolutely need. And ultimately, it will contribute to building democratic global institutions. This whole slide is more technical. I agree, but we don't have to think so technically. My point is, and like Gertrude mentioned already, you don't have to hold a position of power to make any change, as long as you are ensuring that the circle surrounding you is just. If you protest when you see some form of injustice, you have done your bit. If you're being fair in a situation, you're doing your bit. If you're educating yourself in becoming financially independent, you're contributing to economic justice. So as an individual, there are many things that you can do that ultimately lead to economic justice. And it will be amazing if you think that you have money or skill or something that you can share with someone in need. That will be amazing. But even if you're not able to do it, there are many things that you can do as an individual to contribute to attaining economic justice. Then we move on to, I think, I started our conversation like this: why what SDG changemakers can do, and what our role as changemakers should be. It's really a blank canvas. We can do anything we want, and we sort of started the conversation. Would anyone like to share what they think that they can do to promote economic justice?
I think, for me, personally, I think that's what we are already doing as an organization. That's Global Activists Network, organizing these kind of events, these master classes to raise awareness, provide more information, like just to get people to start thinking, if they were already not thinking, about why it's important to pay attention to some of these things, because whether you like it or not, it affects you one way or the other. So yeah, it's just kind of like you could start a movement, write a letter to your MP, just start having conversations. I think that's where maybe most people who may not be really, should I say, confident, or maybe may not have an idea of where to start from, I think conversations, you may think that, oh, that's really nothing, but it's powerful because you're sharing information, and then who knows where that would lead to. But if there's something more that you can do, if you're already kind of into this conversation or you're into this kind of topic, yeah, it could be really like anything that you know that for a fact that it would kind of bring some sort of change or will start some sort of like, yeah, something in your community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to move on to the next slide where I have suggested some things, but do remember that the list goes on. You can think of anything, so some of the things that if you're, for instance, if you're working at a policy development level, you can, even if you're an advocate, an activist, you can advocate for gender transformative policies. No matter where I'm asked for an opinion, this is the first thing that I always start with. We need to have gender transformative policies. We need to educate communities on financial literacy. Once again, this is one of my primary focus areas. In addition to saying that women and girls need to be financially independent, I advocate for financial and digital literacy for everyone. We exist in a time where you need to have quite a good understanding of financial and digital literacy. Do we have, as a community, good understanding of financial products? No, we don't. So that's something that's very, very, very important. And this is, from a very strict economic justice point of view. Challenge harmful stereotypes. Something like FGM still happens. It happens in the UK as well. It happens in a hidden form, but it does happen. If you see anything that's harmful that's happening, you stand up for it, you protest, or you prevent it, or you notify authorities so that it can be prevented. Promote women's leadership. And promoting women's leadership does not mean that you give leadership to someone who's undeserving. There are a lot of biases that exist when it comes to, empowering women to become leaders. So if you are conscious about that, you will see that more and more women end up in leadership positions. And when they do, their thought process is more inclusive because biologically that's how they are. Support ethical and inclusive businesses. Most businesses are revenue driven, which is what businesses do. They want to make profit. But do consider, do they have ethical practices? How are they making their products? Where are they making their products? Who are making your products? How is food being produced? The food that you eat, how is it being produced? Who's producing it? Are those communities looked after well? How are items or products being sourced? Is the company environment friendly? So there's so many things that can come into your perspective when you want to be part of this social circle that where you're trying to support ethical and inclusive businesses. And it doesn't take much. You can just go online and see which businesses have an ethical and inclusive practice and which businesses don't. So it's just developing that sense of consciousness. If you are in advocacy, if you want to get into advocacy, if you have access to governments, it's always a great idea to hold governments accountable. As a member of a citizenship, one of the easiest ways for you to hold your government accountable is by getting in touch with your MP, like Gertrude suggested. I think I saw a hand.
I put a hand up.
Yes, Sally.
I wanted to apologise for getting to remember to start at 6. I was downstairs and I thought, it's funny, it's a very peaceful evening, and suddenly I thought, I've forgotten you. Anyway, I see you're recording it. When you're asking all these questions, what you can do and so on, I think it's the education part is extremely important. Yes. We've begun having some children's classes in my town. My friend does sort of like 6, 7, 8-year-old, and I've been doing a few little 4 and 5-year-old, and they're very different in their development and so on, but they do need a lot of information, and the education they're given is very important. For example, I think they should be taught to observe, around them, the science, the art, and principles of being fair and so on. I belong to the Baha'is, so we are very strong on wanting to help people in that way. And the interesting thing is that the parents are a bit hesitant, but then they might let their child come. But when you've got the child there, you can open the world to them, really, and show them. Now, the other thing was that we have the next door link for where I live. And I was very interested. I printed it off just now so I could tell you. Somebody has written, "Youth workshop facilitators wanted. I'm looking for friendly, enthusiastic people who'll be interested in leading paid online evening sessions for a small group of children ages 6 to 16. Well, okay, well, what do they want to do? Well, they've listed real-life skills like financial literacy, entrepreneurship, debating, leadership, public speaking, confidence, coding, AI, creative skills, and much more, sort of 1 hour or so online and that. Now, this is what they need, but what struck me was they're starting at 6 years old, and 4.5 is when they can read, but they're already sort of seeing what people around them are doing, and they can understand a lot. But if people don't have it in their mind, they just sort of grow up doing the usual schooling, maths and so on, and they may not be aware of all these equality issues and so forth. And it's very easy for a little boy to be swept up in a little gang saying, "Oh, come on, rush through the corridors and shriek and yell and show off, sort of this is the way to behave." And of course, if they're allowed to get away with that, they will grow up not considering other people. So this is where I think it's extremely important now to alter the education system so the schools actually do provide this. Some schools may do, but there's a lot of problems with the education system, and this is where I think I saw that recently we have a nice young woman who is the woman education minister for women and so on. And if we get somebody like that and the Women's Parliamentary Group all working together, perhaps we can actually, make a change and sort of make people listen. But people tend to, well, I know how easy it is to forget. I forgot this evening to listen to you. Oh, very bad, but yes, there's an awful lot one can do, and you're quite right, talk to people. Lots of ideas.
Thank you, Sally, for sharing your ideas, and we're very privileged to have you join us. You were absolutely right in identifying that education is an area where we need more help. I personally think that these sort of programs are on the rise because schools don't have enough funding or the resources that they need to support these sort of programs. There was a time where institutions felt that they were not adequate, that the governments felt that they didn't have sufficient resources, so they relied on civil society, the not-for-profit sector for help to step in, and that's been on the rise. That made some changes, but I am seeing so much disparities, even in quite strong economies, that I have started saying, I have started advocating that it's not for advocates or activists anymore. Now it has to be at the individual level. We can hope for a government that cares for the people, but what if we don't have one? There are many countries where, we see, wrong people have been elected. What do we do when something like that happens? It will come down to taking individual
It has
action.
to be local groups.
Yes.
Yes, local people.
And also, many years ago, I have heard from my grandparents that the local place of worship used to be the place of gathering, and people used to be kind. Being kind used to be the way of life. I think we have become more isolated. We don't think about our neighbors. We don't think about the birds or the animals that visit us. So we have isolated ourselves in many different ways, opening up our eyes towards our surroundings and trying to be kind and useful as a human being makes a huge difference. We don't necessarily need to take formal action to make a change. So, and then again, coming back to your topic, that yes, education, we need more funding, we need more resources. And you said that 6-year-olds, I absolutely support that idea, because something as important as financial education, financial literacy, has to start at that age. The speed at which financial products are changing, and how financial sustenance, financial independence is becoming more and more difficult and competitive, and state resources are declining. Financial literacy, having a sophisticated understanding of financial products or the financial market, is, in my view, a requirement. So absolutely, have made some very valid points, and I totally agree with you there. I have mentioned, some of the things that we can do and how we can take action. Obviously, we can write to our MPs. We can campaign for equal pay. We can support care economy initiatives. We can push for debt justice. Now, that's the massive field. But if you wanted, if you're aware of some communities or individuals who have incurred debt and they are in a very difficult position, there are always ways to advocate around it and get them some resources. It's just that we have to have these sort of thoughts in our conscious mind. Amplify voices from the global majority. Now, I chose the term global majority instead of using global south, but what I mean is low and middle income countries, which forms the significant part of the global population. That's where the diversity lies. That's where, a lot of the unfair practices are prevalent. So we need to identify how we can contribute to those communities, to those countries as well. And if there is some striking unjust practices there, we need to be vocal about it, give their voices a chance, so that can be challenged and reformed, and promote. I think Gertrude had mentioned it several times, promote feminist economic policies. We need to have policies that are inherently feminist in nature. That's the only way forward. There is no other way. There is no other better way of saying it. We need to have feminist policies in place. One example of being injustice I just randomly thought of is, I think, if I'm not wrong, Iraq. It's a country where if a man rapes a girl, even when she's a child, even when she's underage, that man is able to marry the victim and escape punishment. We still have very oppressive laws like this in many different parts of the world. So it's being conscious about what's happening around us and extending our hand to the best we can. We don't have to give away everything we have. It's just, we can be kinder and we can try to help. And we can start with our surroundings. We can start with our neighbors. That's the way to go. Moving on, a call to action. So since we had all of you join us in this discussion, and I learned, I hope that I was able to give you some ideas, and I learned a lot from your feedback, from all the things that you have shared. So I thought that it's great if we can all come together to do something great to promote economic justice. So we, the Global Activists Network, call all the change makers. You all are change makers because you're all thinking about it. You all chose to join today's discussion. So we call all the change makers from all corners of the world to pledge to stand up for economic justice. And more importantly, to leave no one behind. And why this is important? Because when we have economic justice, when we don't have economic justice, gender equality will not exist. Poverty will keep on becoming more and more rampant. Democratic institutions will suffer. So to have a society that's self-sufficient, to have a society where people are thriving, to have a society where human rights violations are not made, we need to promote economic justice, because it's not only about economic independence, it's much greater than that. It solidifies our presence in a society. It solidifies our social well-being. So this is absolutely a necessity. It's not a choice. It's a necessity for all of us. And that's where I end. I'm happy to take any questions. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat box, but I'm going to look at it now. And if you wanted to share any example of unfair practice that you have seen around you, this is the time I will be very happy to take questions from you, or come across, listen to your stories as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and because I want to see all of you. And so do you have any questions for me?
I'll go. So thank you for the brilliant presentation and discussion. As someone who's well knowledge or well versed in this area, you shared some sort of like shocking practices in your country where you're from, but I know you, obviously, I know you personally as a friend and a co-founder of GAN, and I see how you also lend your voice to some of these things on your socials. But beyond that, what have you done as an activist to kind of raise awareness, or should I say face or just deal with some of these challenges or some of these points that you've raised?
So there are a few things that I do. I have some initiatives where I'm providing educational materials to marginalized communities just to ease access to education. That's one of the things that's I find is very important. A lot of the times, even when children want to study, they want to go to school, they're not able to afford notebooks or stationaries in general because they find it so expensive. Because they have to choose between, am I going to eat or am I going to go to school? And that's not the kind of decision that I want these children to be making. That's one thing. The other thing that I focus on is the region where I come from. Deaths due to malnutrition among mothers and newborns is very high. It's one of the leading causes of death. So what I try to do is I provide multivitamins for pregnant women, for new mothers, and also for children, so that they have that prenatal, postnatal vitamins and the nutrients that the body needs at that time, so that they don't suffer from malnutrition. So that's something that's also very close to my heart. These are direct projects that I lead at the grassroots level in many different areas where, populations are extremely vulnerable. That's where I do. on an individual level, I always speak up when I see something that's unfair that's being happening, and that's why I speak up on many different issues. If I want to promote economic justice, I cannot be only talking about financial independence or financial empowerment. It's a whole social universe, ecosystem of things that needs to change, that needs to be fair and become just. So whenever I see any form of injustice, I always speak up. That's something that I do on an individual level. When it comes to specifically on financial digital literacy, I have two campaigns. One is called She Owns, which advocates for women's land and inheritance rights, because it is a massive issue in the developing world. And I have another campaign campaign called Literacy is Inclusion. And I use literacy as access to education, having proper education, having financial education, having digital education, because we are progressing towards a world where things are extremely sophisticated. Their digital technology is advancing. Financial products are becoming very, very complicated. Yet there are many people who don't even have a phone, who don't have access to internet, who don't have a computer. They have not even seen they don't even know what a computer is. So, you can teach people who have the gadgets, who have the access, but I'm talking about people who are like absolutely left out of that world. That's where I chose to work in, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to start there. We can start wherever we want, as long as we are contributing. But those are two campaigns that I lead. In addition to I do advisory work when it comes to policy development, and that's where my specialty is on economic justice. So these are some of the things that I do to promote economic justice.
I remember a story about which country, I don't know, but the people did not have much in the way of telephones or anything. And somebody went to the marketplace and they put a computer there and people could come and have a go. And the ones who actually were interested and dared to try were the children. And they were able to learn in that way. Now, it doesn't take much to provide that minimal amount. And I know some charities do work to provide such things, mobile phone and so on. Nowadays, you almost have to have a mobile phone if you want to make an appointment with a doctor or talk to your bank if you've anything. It's people just do have to have access to this, whether they share or not. So just don't know. It's such, when I think of it, it's just millions of people suffering all around the world, and you want to help them, and you can't do it all.
Yes.
And of course, the Sudan is a particularly harrowing place. I was there when I was a child, and so I sort of note it, but it's getting worse and worse rather than better and better. And it's the lack of ability to share somehow.
Absolutely, and the more the more worse it gets, we need to be more proactive on how we sort of speak up for people who can't speak for themselves or who can't have their voices heard. I'm just conscious of time. We're really.
I just wanted to say, thank you for sharing that, and it's great to see that you're not just, speaking up, using your voice, but you're actually walking the talk. So thank you and kudos to you for everything you're doing on the topic.
Thank you. I'm just going to give a few seconds to see if there's any other question before I end today's discussion.
Can I catch up on the early part because you have recorded it?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to share the recording with everyone who attended our session.
Thank you.
Thank
Much
you, Sally.
appreciated.
Thank you. So just before I end our session, I encourage everyone to follow the Global Activists Network-GAN on our socials. We have a profile on Instagram. We have a profile on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, X. We have a channel where we post expert discussions that we undertake on a monthly basis on YouTube. We post our podcast where we interview changemakers doing amazing work from all over the world on a fortnightly basis, and we have that on Spotify. So please follow us on our socials and encourage your friends to do the same, because we post and we amplify work through our social media platforms. And in addition to that, we always call for people to write about issues or amazing work that they're doing. So we invite articles, we publish at no, obviously we don't charge anything for it. We want to, bring your stories to the world. So if you have any submissions to make, please do submit your articles. If you're seeing someone who's doing amazing work, please nominate those change makers. We are always looking for inspiring stories. And if you have any partnership ideas, we're there for that as well. So please do visit our website, which is www.gan.org.uk, and you'll have a good idea of what we do and the options that we have there. And yeah, keep supporting us, keep joining us, and we'll see everyone soon. And thank you for joining.